Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to our conversation today. Welcome to Manifesting Inclusion. In a second, we will begin, but we want to take some time and go through some introductions, some house rules. We are so happy to have you. So, thank you to today's show. We will be talking about strategies for inclusive leadership development outside of the classroom. So for our folks working in the nonprofit space, the K through 12 space, the higher education space, woot woot, we are so happy to have you join us today. So let's go over a little bit of house rules before we go over introductions. So first things first, besides you all being the realists, we simply ask that you engage with us. If this conversation is engaging, please let our guests know. Say, ooh, girl, that was good. Leave some clapping hands, leave some emojis. Let us know that you're here with us and present here on LinkedIn Live. Additionally, if you could take a second and there's an arrow at the bottom of your screen, if you're able to see that, and share this. That not only lets folks know that you're engaging in this professional development, that you were a part of a meaningful conversation. And our guests love to see what you said after the show. Last but not least, as we're talking about sensitive topics, if you have a comment, we simply ask that if you're going to ask a question about a specific event, that you use a pseudonym or Apple University or mention any names like Apple Macintosh as a first and last. That's just to protect the privacy of those who we might be speaking about, as well as the event. So now that we've gone through a bit of house rules, we would love to welcome Darron Jenkins and Natasha to our show today. We've got a great group of people that we met at UNCG. So, for introductions, my name is Lee Miles, and I am one half of the Manifesting Inclusion team. And I am welcomed here by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Laura Gonzalez, who is not only a sister, but a friend of mine. So I'll skip over to her for introductions.
Thank you so much, Lee. Yes, my name is Laura Gonzalez, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm actually here today at the Latin Education Summit in Winston-Salem. And so if there's a little bit of conference noise in the background, it's just awesome people doing awesome things. Apart from my time working as a faculty member at UNCG, I have now started my own business and do educational consulting for immigrant and refugee youth. But we are here today to hear from our wonderful guest speakers. And so I would love to pass the mic over to Natasha for further introductions.
Thanks, Dr. G. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Natasha Young. I use she, her pronouns. I currently serve as a leadership development program coordinator at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I got the opportunity to meet these lovely people working in housing and residence life at UNC Greensboro, where a lot of my professional journey really started. The work that I do now that I'm really passionate about is I kind of live in the nonpartisan civic engagement space. So helping students access voter education, voter registration, any and all things, and being engaged with the community. And then I also have the opportunity to do any kind of holistic co-curricular leadership development opportunities, whether that's retreats, workshop series, consulting with academic departments, and how we can also help folks, engage in leadership outside of the classroom and things like that. So really excited to have the opportunity to speak with y'all today. And I will pass it over to Darron.
Hi, everyone. My name is Darron Jenkins. I use he, him, his pronouns. I serve as program manager at UNC Greensboro, UNC-Wilmington. I met most of these lovely folks at UNCG, so that is why my mind went to UNCG, because I'm seeing all these lovely people's faces on the screen. But I received my bachelor's degree in human resource management from the University of Southern Mississippi, and then I went on to receive my master's degree from Louisiana State University, studying higher education administration. Leadership has always been important to me. I started off with my graduate assistantship doing leadership development initiatives for housing and residence life, and I also did a lot of leadership development work while I was at UNC Greensboro. And currently, I serve as the program manager for student success and retention. So I provide institutional leadership for our Live and Learn Community program as a quality student success initiative and one of our 8 high impact pathways at UNC-Wilmington. So I like to provide a lot of leadership development initiatives within that program as well by collaborating with my campus partners, both in academic affairs and student affairs, because what I realize as a professional is that I have a lot of expertise, but I'm not an expert in everything. And so I like to invite my campus partners in when I'm working with my students, particularly when it involves leadership and inclusion initiatives. I like to rely on the expertise of those folks in those areas so that we're really providing a holistic experience for our students. So I am happy to be here today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Darren and Natasha, we are so grateful to have you all here today. A little about Manifest Inclusion for those of you all who have not yet connected with us. We are a collaborative team. We have about a team of 15 total. Those are researchers, those are scholar practitioners, those are folks who work in the nonprofit or the corporate spaces. And we just want to think about innovative and creative strategies to create inclusion for all in all places. And so if you're not familiar with us, please follow us over at Manifesting Inclusion on LinkedIn. That's the social media that we use. And if you would like to collaborate with us, please let us know. So let's get into our conversation today, good people. We are so excited to be talking about strategies for leadership development outside of the classroom. So Natasha, let's start with you. So how did you get engaged in this work? And this work could be equity work, this work could be student development work, but how did you get into it and what's your higher ed story?
Yeah, I joke that I kind of have one of the more stereotypical higher ed stories. So I was the overly involved undergraduate student. In undergrad, I went to a small state school in New Hampshire, which is where I'm from, Keene State College. And actually, the reason I really got involved on campus was because I originally had no desire to be at the institution I was at. I really wanted to go to art school, but it was so expensive and I couldn't afford it. And so my intention was to use Keene State as a stepping stone. But I also had a conversation with myself early on that I had agency over the experience that I was going to have there. And so I could go in on my first day knowing that I was just going to check out, or I could go in and at least try and get the best out of my experience and maximize on the opportunities that were available to me. And so that led me to getting involved in our hall council and a few student organizations, the programming board. And I turned out to really love it. And that kind of made my college experience and actually retained me at Keene State, because otherwise I do believe I would have left. And so I think my story and my experience can really be a testament that involvement and opportunities outside of just the classroom can be true retention strategies. And for me, like I found my place and I found ways to challenge myself and build community and meet people that I don't think I ever would have interacted with previously had I not been involved in certain things on campus. And so that is really what guided me into working in higher ed, because again, I saw the experience that I had had and I wanted to help foster that for others. So I started doing that in the residential space as an RA and, working as a hall director at UNCG. And I think where I've seen that come to fruition differently working in leadership development full time is now I am the person that I think some people look at, and I see the students that may have been in a similar headspace to where I was in when I was an undergrad, and I'm able to relate to them in a really different way. And so I think that's one of the things that really keeps me motivated on the day-to-day, and just being able what it looks like to engage with students and make sure that folks are able to find experiences that matter to them. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Thanks so much for that, Natasha. Let's go over to you, Darren.
Yeah, so my story is very similar to Natasha's story. I was one of those students that was involved on campus when I was an undergrad. I was involved as an RA, went through the RHA route as well. And then I was president of a student organization that some of my friends started, and I was president of my business fraternity, and I was on the business student council for the College of Business. So I was an involved student leader, but I was also one of those students that didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. I always knew that I wanted to help people and be in those types of spaces where I could really make a difference, but I didn't exactly know what that looked like. And then very similar to like most of my colleagues in higher education, someone tapped me and said, "Oh, you would be really good at this," right? And so And so I looked more into it as a potential career field, and I was like, oh, this is actually something I could do, and I probably be really good at it. And so I decided to pursue it. Went and got my master's from Louisiana State University in the Higher Education Administration program. And then my assistantship was in residential life as the GA for leadership initiatives. And so I was the advisor for their RHA and NRHH, and really trying to really strategically think about how we can reshape that program and make it a quality leadership initiative for the students there. And we were able to do that. Definitely put in some groundwork. I was the first grad in that position, so that was a very interesting journey, because there was really nothing that was in place. You kind of had to create everything on your own, which was a great experience for me, because it really honed in on my administrative skills and really thinking about like what's going to be best for our students. And so I went on to UNCG and did a lot of leadership development work there as well. Started as a leadership coach for a few years. Was RHA and RHH advisor for a few years as well. And then also got involved with some other leadership spaces within UNCG. And so when I think about leadership, I specifically for our students is really pushing them beyond their limits and really honing in on this idea of challenge and support, right? And not telling students how to do things, let them experience it on their own, and ask those thought-provoking questions about how was this experience impactful for you, and like what would you do differently in the situation, and providing those thought-provoking questions for students. And so I think even as I oversee this program now, as I tell my LLC peer mentors all the time, you have to learn to challenge your students that you're working with. And sometimes when you agree to disagree on certain things, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. That's how you continue to learn and to continue to grow. And so I think as a leader, we have to continue to teach our students how to have those difficult conversations.
Thank you both. It was so nice to have a chance to learn a little bit more about you as people, as you told us about the ways that you started your journeys, becoming involved as students. I wonder if you could also think with me for a minute about students who may not have been super involved like you. So, like, I'm kind of an introverted person. I remember as a college student, I was probably even more of an introverted person. But I think part of what I hope and believe is that there's a space for everyone to get involved and to find a way to express their strengths or their leadership. So I wonder if either one of you could talk about like students who maybe need that little extra nudge to find a good space for their involvement, or how you might help to draw some of those students out.
Natasha, I'm gonna let you go first.
Okay, sounds good. I think the biggest thing that I would recommend is, and something we talk about in the office that I work in right now, is I'm very big on non-positional leadership, right? Like, you don't have to be necessarily in an organization. You don't have to be the president of a club to be a leader. And so I oftentimes have this conversation with students that have to work full time to stay in school, which is very real for a lot of students, that the job that you might be doing outside of campus, even if it's not on campus, it's not a work study role. If you're working at McDonald's or Target overnight, like, there are leadership skills and things that can come out of that. And there are ways to talk about those experiences to highlight the leadership that you might have in a role and what you've taken out of something, whether that is engaging in conflict mediation or conflict resolution with customers, team members. If you're maybe over a team in some capacity, like you have some kind of team building aspect of how you've worked with others, maybe you've given feedback to people before, like, those are really important skills that are necessary in any kind of leadership realm that can show up in anything that you might be involved in, especially a job outside of the classroom. The other one that I would add, I will say I'm like a low energy extrovert. And so, like, I was always the one that wanted to be out there, running around and being in somebody's face about something when I was an undergrad. But I think I have more understanding of our introverted students these days. And so what I would tell to those students that maybe are more shy or more hesitant to get involved in something, think about what your capacity looks like to be engaged in something. And so, if you know that your alone time is really important to you, something that my office does is we have an online asynchronous co-curricular leadership certificate. And so students can engage with that in their own time. I'm really lucky I was able to help implement and create some of that content there. But maybe there are ways that your university or even going, if you have a LinkedIn Learning account through your university in some way, like that's a great opportunity to get content and to get information and resources and knowledge and build it in a way that makes sense for you on your own time. Or even just finding one thing that makes sense for you, whether that's a club with people that you enjoy being around, maybe it's a study group outside of a class. I think those are ways that folks can engage in leadership-based experiences that also might be a little more non-traditional.
Yeah, so I think the cool thing about leadership is that it's not singular and it's not a linear way to be a leader. So I think that's the cool thing about leadership. I'll share that I consider myself as a person, as a professional, extroverted introvert. Because at the core of who I am an extrovert. Higher ed has taught me how to be an extrovert, but at the core of who I am, I really am an introvert. So when I think about trying to get students involved that may tend to be more introverted in nature, I think one of the things is promoting those types of leadership roles that matches their strengths, right? Really starting to get to know students and having those conversations about who they really are and seeing like what are the things that they want to do and the things that they want to accomplish, and then trying to find them leadership positions that matches their strengths and the types of experiences that they seek. I would also say encourage the one-on-one involvement, because I think that also it can help students, specifically those that are more introverted in nature. I think about opportunities like peer mentorship, tutoring, or some type of peer advising, like those one-on-one types of experiences that you can give to students. Also think about like the small group opportunities, right? Because, you may have an extroverted student that may do very well with facilitating large conversations or being over a large student organization like SGA, for example, right? But then you may have these other students that may, because they're introverted in nature, they need to have like a smaller environment to pursue those leadership opportunities. So think about those types of opportunities that you can promote to students. I think the other thing that I would highlight is the importance of recognizing quiet leadership, because just because you're the loudest person in the room doesn't always mean that you're the most effective leader. And so I think it's important for us as professionals, as we're working with students specifically, we're thinking about promoting leadership, is the importance of recognizing your voice and how you show up in a space.
I just want to say thank you. My introvert self felt so seen and heard by you all.
Also, I want to dig into that a little bit more. So, I'm on day 8 of a new job, and in this associate director role, so I'm the associate director of inclusive excellence affairs at Wake Forest University. And one of the things we talk a lot about is competencies, and then mapping those competencies into programmatic thrust for an organization. So I love this thought about quiet leadership, because often you go from being a first year student to being identified as a leader to being shoulder tapped in your sophomore year to being an RA or a president to your junior and senior year running for positions or gaining positions that give you access to upper layer leadership at a university or campus. So let's dig into the quiet leadership piece. What are some skills that you see in students or that you've done assessment based wise? So it might be an MBTI or a strengths finder, but what are some key leadership skills or competencies you think people need to go from quiet leader to successful leader?
Okay, Lee, that's a deep question there. So I think it's a couple things. If you have students that you're working with that may be more introverted and have like that quiet leadership. So I think the first thing that I would say is working to really develop their active listening skills, because I think as a quiet leader, you're already like, for the most part, people that tend to be more quiet and more introverted in nature tend to be more observant in certain spaces. So really trying to hone in on those active listening skills and really trying to understand what are the needs of whatever that organization looks like, the project, whatever it is that you're the leader of. Really trying to hone in to see what are the needs that need to be addressed. I think that you also need to help students with their decision making skills and their critical thinking skills, because as we know, as the students continue to come in through different generations, um, those skills are lacking. And I think even when you think about high school students coming in on the cusp of COVID and all the technology things that have happened where they may be lacking some of those interpersonal skills, like we have to be intentional on making sure that we're helping students develop those interpersonal skills, because I think that also ties into why you may have more students that are in that quiet leadership mode, as opposed to being more of a vocal leader. Um, Natasha, what do you think? Because I'm still processing that. Because that's a really deep question, Lee. I
Yeah.
appreciate that one.
Yeah, and Darren, I definitely agree with everything you've said and outlined. And active listening would have been the first thing I would have said. The other thing that I also kind of want to lean in to something that Darren said earlier too, about like being loud doesn't always mean you're the most successful leader. And so I think a skill that I would highlight for students that vocally may not be the most upfront and may not be the first person to say something all the time, you can still be confident in your decisions and you can still be confident in what you're saying, even if you're not the loudest person in the room. And so I think being able to, I guess, find some synergy between, you might be soft-spoken or you may not be, again, be the person that speaks all the time, but like you can still have and develop that confidence in a space and justify that even if you're not the loudest person. And so I think finding ways to kind of build that there. The other thing that I would add to, and this might come from my art background, is I think sometimes when you're in a position where you are being more observant and you're looking at a group of people, you see trends that might be happening that other folks may not see right off the bat, whether that's reading the body language that people in a meeting are maybe having, or you might notice sometimes tension or conflict that might be present that nobody is saying something about. And so I think that also can leverage some of our quiet leaders to be the folks that say things that need to be said, or just notice things that need to be noticed that maybe aren't noticed right off the bat. And so I think those levels of observance or like perspective taking and empathy are things that can come from that space from our quiet leaders. And I think the thing I would also add for practitioners or advisors or scholars or anybody that might be working with students in that area is I would just really advise, like, don't try and make a student fit into a position that doesn't make sense to them. And so what does it look like to be an advisor or a supervisor that validates, those strengths and that lived experience of the student too? Because I think oftentimes it's easy, and I know I've probably done it before when I was younger in my career, of wanting my students to be more assertive or to speak up. And if that really just isn't for them and these other aspects of quiet leadership make more sense to them, validate that and think about what does it look like to continue strengthening those things that make that leader great, rather than trying to fit them into something that doesn't make sense for them.
And I think the only other thing that I would add to that is the power of the influence in terms of leading through example, because people that are typically more quieter in nature tend to lead by example in terms of their actions. And so putting that emphasis on if this is, think about the type of leader that you want to be. And because typically when you are a leader and people see you as a leader, not only are they listening to the things that you're saying, but they're also looking at how you respond to things and what your actions are. So that would probably be the only other thing I would add to that.
Thank you both. You've given us so many great ideas and strategies and really concrete ways to encourage our students and help them, identify the things in themselves that are strengths that they can build in towards leadership. So I just really appreciate all of those examples. If we think more at maybe a programmatic level, what are some examples that you all have seen of things that have really worked well? So some kind of leadership program that maybe is like the LLC that Darren had mentioned earlier, or programs that can help a lot of students sort of find that space and plug in and grow their leadership. And either one of you can start.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one to start, because it's kind of also with timing is at the forefront of my mind for me. So I worked with a leadership program that is catered towards the leadership development and experience of women in their first year from underrepresented racial and ethnic identities. And so that's a program that has been around since 2016. And I think what's really valuable about that program is it's a retreat that students go on in the fall semester. And it's entirely facilitated by other students. And so we have a counselor team that are folks that have gone through the program before, or maybe haven't. They don't. It's not necessarily required, but they're passionate about, wanting to engage in peer leadership and facilitation around inclusive spaces and inclusive leadership and dialogue. And so something I think really makes that opportunity successful is there is an inability for, maybe students that went in as initial participants, and they can come into that space and gain a leadership position as a facilitator and as a counselor. And I think in that capacity, those students are able to, even if they come back to the role, continue to build on everything that they've done. And so it really can become like this longitudinal opportunity for students to be involved. And so I've become a huge advocate of, peer facilitator based roles and things like that students can come back to or continue to expand on. And the other thing that I would add in relation to that I completely just lost my train of thought on. But I mean, yeah, big things there, student facilitated things, and the buy-in that folks have related to that. The piece I was going to come back to was a lot of students ask me why that program is not like a student organization. And really part of it is because the intention is for when students establish relationships, with other students and with the counselor team, they kind of see where other folks are involved, and it allows them to branch out and to kind of dictate their journey in a way that makes sense for them. And it's not necessarily just another student org that they would come to. I think it just opens a lot of doors and a lot of different bridges for what students might want to do to determine, their leadership journey and the rest of their experience.
So what I'll add to that is I think that campus life at UNCW does a wonderful job at providing those leadership opportunities for our students at UNCW. Context, reason why I know a lot about campus life at UNCW is because I actually started off at UNCW and campus life as an assistant director before I transitioned to my current role as program manager for student success and retention. But some of the things I want to highlight that UNCW does that I really think is really cool. The first thing is the involvement compass, and I really haven't seen another type of program like that at other institutions. So essentially, inside of our engagement and involvement portal, I know it's called different things at different institutions. I know it was called Spark Connect at UNCG. It's called Wavelink at UNCW. But essentially, it's a form that students can fill out, and it's kind of used as kind of like an intervention tool, right? For students that may not know how they want to get involved on campus and like whatever that looks like for them. And so a student is able to access that. They fill out the form, it's a series of questions. Then we have student employees that are called involvement specialists. Between the involvement specialists and the professional staff members in campus life in the student involvement and leadership area, they analyze what was the responses from the students, and then they look at the different events that are happening on campus and the different student organizations that are on campus, and they send them a response. It was like, based on your responses, these are the things that we recommend that you get involved in. I think that that's a really cool initiative we have at UNCW. We also have 2 different leadership opportunities that students can partake in throughout the academic year. The first one's called Activate, and it's primarily for our first year students and our second year students to kind of jumpstart their leadership journey at UNCW, if you will. And in the spring semester, we have Elevate is what it's called. It's Activate and Elevate. The Elevate is more so for our juniors and seniors to really talk about what does leadership look like for them once they get ready to leave UNCW, and like how they can take the leadership skills that they've learned and how to apply that into their careers. And so I think that that's also a really cool program. The other thing that I would highlight, going back to some of the things that Natasha was saying, is the importance of those opportunities where we can get our students involved and connected in those peer type roles, right? So that looks like being an RA or being like an involvement specialist, like how we have them at UNCW, or being an orientation leader, whatever that looks like, right? Or for those students that may be more introverted in nature, maybe getting them involved in some student organizations that's directly connected to their major, right? So thinking about those different opportunities that we can continue to get our students involved.
Darron, you made me think of something else too, and that was specifically things related to student employment. I work in our student union currently, and we have 3 different levels of employment positions. And so what that kind of creates for us is almost a pipeline to keep students, one, retain them in their student employee roles, But maybe if they start out in like our entry level kind of positions, maybe those might be like our front desk workers or our office assistants. Then there's kind of like a mid-level position, and then what we call a lead position, which is really like kind of student project manager based roles. And so if you're somebody that maybe works in an entity that you're hiring students, think about what it might mean to create a scaffolded pipeline for students to come in at some kind of level. And if there also might be an opportunity for them to expand those skills or go more in depth in the next year or second year. I think creating really intentional like student employment opportunities like that are maybe tied to competencies and can be really transit onto a resume pretty easily as well are also really great leadership opportunities too.
Yeah. The one more thing that I just thought about that UNCW does that I want to highlight is they have a leadership development series. They call it the Emotional Intelligence Leadership Series. And I really think that that's a really good tool for students, specifically those that are, and I keep going back to the quiet student, right? Because I do think that that's a population of students that we really do need to tap more into when it comes to leadership development. But what I like about that series is that these students be in smaller groups and they have intentional conversations about what it means to be emotional intelligent in your leadership and your decision making. So definitely think if institutions have programs that are similar, those leadership development type students that students can attend, I think that's another way that we can tap into really honing in on developing college students' leadership skills.
I just want to take a moment and pause as we had a wealth of information. If you're enjoying this, please leave us a comment if there's something that really resonated with you, or you specifically going to know, like, how did you hire those students, or what does that look like at your university, or how many do you have, or how do we develop them? Please drop those comments and love in the chat. And if you haven't already, go ahead and share this conversation with someone. They can join us now, or they can watch us all the way in 2039 because this is streamed. But we're so grateful to have Darron and Natasha today, and we'll pass it over to Dr. G for our next question.
Yeah, so we would like to also think a little bit about community involvement as a way that we can help students enhance their leadership skills. So I know at UNCG that the office that has had a couple of different names through time, but there's an office that has helped students think about, service learning or community engagement, and maybe not just in a surface level way, but in a deeper way that really does help students think about, like, how can I be of service in this world? And what is my contribution? What is important to me as far as, a difference I might want to make? So I wonder how you think about community engagement as a way we can also consider leadership development.
Yeah, so I think that community service, civic engagement, I think is extremely important in the college students' development, because I think that's one of the things that we should, as staff members and administrators, that we should be teaching students outside the classroom, is the importance of civic engagement, community service, and just being a holistic citizen, right? So I think it's important to highlight some of those civic engagement and community service initiatives that are happening around campus, because they're, truth be told, there are so many different opportunities, and I think it's just important to highlight some of those opportunities, because sometimes students don't really know where to go to know where those opportunities are. One of the things that UNCW has done very well is they've taken some financial investment and created a portal very similar to like the Wavelinks and the Smart and Connects of the world, but it's just specifically for community service and civic engagement initiatives. And so again, I think just really highlighting the importance of that, of civic engagement, community service. I think that's important. And I think just having those intentional conversations about them, honestly, because even with the peer mentors that I work with for my LLC program, we've had those intentional conversations, like during their training, about, like, when you're doing programs, you're doing different initiatives, like really think about having community service initiatives and civic engagement initiatives, and not only having those opportunities for students, but be able to really explain to students, like, what's the learning outcome from this, like what are you supposed to be getting out of this experience, as it relates to community service and civic engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with what Darron's outlined too. The other thing I would add in this service learning space. I think sometimes like service learning can feel really intimidating, especially if you're looking at something that might be a course that is a semester long. Like, it can feel like a lot of commitment. A lot of universities, I know UNC-Chapel Hill does this. They might offer like smaller, alternative break programs. Like we have one that happens over fall break, or maybe over spring break. I would say, even encourage students to dip their toes into something that's shorter commitment if they're hesitant about going all the way into, a semester or a year-long based program, because I know those are also really common at a lot of universities. So find ways to engage in a way that makes sense with your capacity and what you might want to do. I think in terms of, because I work in the civic engagement space too, I think this is a really common conversation I have with, my student leaders and other folks that just frequent our office. One of the main things I really talk to folks about is thinking beyond what we call like the UNC campus bubble. Because we found, I think sometimes a lot of our students don't see themselves as being a part of the Chapel Hill community, even if they live off campus, or, the fact that they get their trash picked up by, the Department of Public Works, and they take Chapel Hill Transit to get to campus and all those things. And so something really cool that our local government in Chapel Hill does is what they call a People's Academy. And that's like an in-depth opportunity for anybody who's a part of the community to go on tours of some of the campus of the town facilities, like the fire department, and really just engage in panels with like the town manager's office and meet the mayor and things like that. And so I would really encourage, and maybe even sit down with folks and look at what are some ways to engage in community-based opportunities, because 9 times out of 10, they're probably open to students as well, especially if you are somebody that lives in that space. And so really just helping folks recognize like the involvement that could happen outside of that. I'm actually kind of jealous of you that UNCW has a system where folks can look for those opportunities off campus, because I'm not aware if we have one here. But yeah, finding ways just to help students recognize that just because they might be here for 9 or 10 months out of the year, like they can still have a large impact in the community. And then the other thing that I would add is a lot of times the students are passionate, right? Like, whether it's about academics or issues or social change or anything else in between, the things that they might advocate for and care about on campus probably apply off campus in some capacity too. So, I mean, we hear students, affordable housing is a huge thing in our community that students are very impacted by directly. And so, sometimes it might be, getting involved in like a campus-based organization or a campus club or committee that might be invested in, housing security in some area. But there's also a lot of initiatives that exist in the town and the county around those things as well. And so being able just, I think, to like sit down and talk with folks and think on the larger scale, like what it looks like to advocate for those things that you care about. Something else that we kind of do within our, promote democracy-based coalitions is some of our campus partners facilitate workshops on like, how do you write to legislators? And specifically, how do you write to legislators that might have some locus of control over an issue that you care about? Because sometimes it can feel really easy to be like, oh, the governor or the president or the whomever there actually might be a local based position that has way more agency over something than, those larger state-based or federal-based positions. And so we do a lot of intentional work with students around what does it look like to advocate for issues that you care about in a targeted way that makes sense for the locus of control of folks that are elected into office. So I think that's huge. And then, of course, can always promote voting as well. And specifically, thinking about the down ballot races that might exist in your local community. And so, for us, city council might have huge impacts on things that might happen on campus. That's going to vary depending on where you are. So really encouraging folks that if they're eligible voters to do their research on those, maybe smaller level positions that they are not as familiar with. There can be huge implications, for what their experience might be as a student, and contribute to like why it's so important to be civically engaged, especially in terms of voting.
Another thing that I would add to that, specifically encouraging faculty members to make the curricular connection to whatever their course content is to community service and civic engagement, specifically for those courses that the 300-400 level courses, like the courses that we know our students are actually invested in when it's like their major courses. So I think if there's ways that faculty can kind of intertwine that within their courses, I think that could also be impactful, because what we know is that student involvement and retention, like it all increases when students are involved and they have that investment both inside and outside the classroom. So I think that's something that could also help as it relates to civic engagement.
So I'm thinking about how do we gain more knowledge and become more self-aware. So you all mentioned skills like active listening, We can add in the soft skills like communication, right? And not just communicating to communicate, but communicate in a way that people can understand. And that has to be an intercultural and inclusive space. How did you learn more about your leadership style? So, what are some of those tangible assessments or opportunities that folks can engage and involve in, maybe on a campus, but also as a professional, that would help them develop their leadership skills?
Yeah, so I think it's a few different things for me because I know my leadership style, my leadership philosophies kind of develop over time and it continues to change as like life circumstances happen. But I do think having those assessments are helpful. So the Strengths Finders assessment, and I know that there are some folks that say you shouldn't take it more than once, but I'm an advocate of taking it multiple times because what I have seen over my life and my career as I've retaken that assessment is that my strengths change based on the environment that I'm in at that time. There's like one or two like harmony and adaptability that have remained consistent within the amount of time that I have taken the Strength Finders assessment, but there are others that have shown up in different ways in my both in my personal life and my professional life that have shifted over time. So I think the Strength Finders assessment is a really good one. MBTI is another one that I think is really good. Another one that I was introduced to in the last year is this personality assessment, and that one was really helpful for me in terms of like how I show up in a space and when I'm recognizing other folks that may have a different type of personality as me, like how can I communicate with them in order to for it to be a win-win situation for the both of us, right? So I definitely think those different assessments, they definitely help shape whatever your personal leadership philosophy may be.
Yeah, retweet all of the ones that Darren said. Those are definitely really common ones that I use. The other one, and I usually kind of joke about this too, but like I'm a bit of an astrology nerd. And so like think about, if you're into astrology or just want, something a little bit out of the box, like look at those things that show up in your chart and think about maybe what resonates with you and what doesn't. I think just the biggest caveat that I would give, I really love assessments for giving folks language or knowledge or starting to raise those aspects of self-awareness around what are you good at? How do you show up with groups of people? But your whole personality doesn't need to be, your top five strengths or your MBTI or things like that. Yeah. And so really encouraging folks that I see assessments as a stepping stone to help, kind of build some of those skills. And something else I would add too is encouraging folks to ask their peers and do peer-based assessments. So something that I've done in like values development workshops with students is what would other people say you value? What would your student organization members say that you value? That I usually lead that conversation in terms of like espoused versus enacted values and things like that. But I think that could even be a good starting point. One, to teach students to maybe have some tough conversations and to engage in a little bit of radical candor with their peers, but can also kind of give them that stepping point of maybe how they're showing up based on how students perceive them too.
I'd like to add one quick thing to this conversation about assessments. So part of the Manifesting Inclusion Project is a book that will be released down the road here in a little bit. And one of the chapters of the book is about leadership. And the four authors of that chapter each sort of tell their personal story and how it relates to, what became important to them as far as leadership, what they value, or things that helped them see their own strengths or even see some of their blind spots in areas where they needed to grow. And at the end of that chapter, they have sort of a free-form journaling type assessment to help people really think reflectively about their leadership. So in addition to a formal assessment like the Strengths Finder, I think a good old-fashioned like journaling session can be really helpful to help you. And again, I agree with Darren, it changes at different points in time to really reflect on like, who am I now and what have I learned recently? And like, what does the world as it looks now need from me? And like, what do I have to give? So that is just something I wanted to throw into the mix. I might need to log off in another 2 or 3 minutes. So I just wanted to express my deep appreciation for not only the wisdom and the great practical examples that Natasha and Darren have shared with us, but also just the real depth of your thinking. It's such a treat to be in such a space with people who have thought so carefully about leadership. And so I just want to lift both of you up as examples of really meaningfully reflective leaders. So thank you both for being here with us.
Thank you all so much. So we're going to shift to question and answer now. So if you have questions or comments and you just want to say, phenomenal job, Natasha, phenomenal job, Dr. Deere, phenomenal job, Darren, please drop them in the chat. As well as if you have any questions, please let us know. We would love to answer them now or follow up with you later in the chat. But I want to take a moment. We're coming up on a year of war conflict very, very soon. That is happening overseas that many of us are not actively engaged in a day to day. We are also coming up on an election, right? And so I just want to give a moment of pause and silence as you all are thinking about your questions, but to also give respect where respect is due. Thank you so much for your observation. So let's go into some question and answer. We know that folks might be thinking, we know that there are internal and external processors, so feel free to leave a comment at any time. But I have a question specifically for Natasha and Darren when we think about inclusion. As you work with these different types of leaders, how do we remember that there cannot be leadership without inclusive efforts and inclusive excellence? So, how do you all go about making sure that in your leadership organizations or in a student position that everyone feels included and there's an energy of everyone belongs here?
I'm thinking.
I'm happy
thinking
to.
Take your
Yeah,
time.
I'm happy to start off too with that. Thank you again for a very in-depth question. I think something that shows up a lot for me in terms of modeling inclusion and wanting to create as inclusive of a space as possible is something that I care about a lot with students is being able to show up authentically and being able to show up as themselves. I show up in my office every day as a queer woman with tattoos that sometimes is stressed out and overcaffeinated, and trying to just navigate my priorities. How do I, support students with all of the things that are going on in the world too? And I think what comes from that sometimes is I think I practice a level of vulnerability at times with students and how I might show up in a space, and I talk through maybe even my imperfections at times. I own up when I make mistakes, whether it's to students or to other staff members. And I think I take that to heart a lot because, if I don't show these things that I'm trying to teach somebody, or if I'm trying to, facilitate a session on, how are those students really supposed to get something out of that too if they don't see that from, folks that they might see as leaders? And so I think that's really big for me in terms of beginning to model inclusion. And the other thing I would add as well is setting different elements of group norms with the space. So if you're working with a team, whether it's a student employment space or a student organization, or just a different opportunity or initiative, I think what matters is creating group norms of how y'all are going to show up together. So what does it look like to ask intentional questions? How do you hold each other accountable? So if somebody says something that is harmful or perpetuates something harmful, what does it look like to hold each other accountable in that space and learn and grow from those mistakes? So that truly those priorities of inclusion can be centered in opportunities. So being able to engage, I think, thoughtfully and really intentionally around all of those things, and just setting the tone too of maybe what a team environment might look like can do a lot, I think, to begin fostering levels of inclusive excellence.
So a couple things come to mind when I think about that question. I think the first thing for me is emphasizing the value of diverse perspectives, because I think that we all come from different backgrounds, different philosophies, specifically those of us that may have been raised in more conservative households, and then there are some of us that may be more liberal backgrounds, and really putting the emphasis on the importance of actually listening. And again, going back to this concept of active listening, right? Really listening to the different perspectives that you may experience when you're engaging with other people, and just being open to that. I think another thing is is encouraging I guess the concept of being empathetic towards people, because I think empathy is one of those things where when you're dealing with several different people and several different types of personalities, like you have to have a level of empathy when you're a leader in a diverse environment. I also agree with Natasha when she was talking about showing up authentically, specifically those of us that are faculty and staff members at our institutions. We have to model what inclusive behavior looks like, right? And because what we do know is that our students are always watching us, like they are mimicking our behaviors. And so we have to be mindful of that as we are working with our students. I think the only other thing that I would add is the importance of encouraging feed forward, right? And my boss kind of introduced me to this concept of feed forward. Instead of looking at things as feedback, 'cause, when you look at feedback, it's like you're always focusing on what you could have done differently in the past. But like when you think about feed forward, it's really thinking about like how can you respond differently in the future in order to have a better outcome. So really having those intentional conversations with students about the importance of feed forward and again those active listening skills as well.
Well, Dr. G was not lying when she said you all brought a depth of information and continue conversation. So we're doing events every single day this year right now, Thursdays at 1 p.m. as much as our schedule allows. Our upcoming conversation will be with the Nakia Campbell and the Demarcus Merritt Sr., who will be talking about creating authentic relationships with students, faculty, and staff. So if you're joining us from the UNCG community or from the many communities that we've been part of, we are so delighted to have you soon. And then our following week, we cannot wait to celebrate Latinx Heritage Month. And we'll be talking about how to create inclusive communities for those folks, and specifically around the idea of students, faculty, and staff. So we just want to take some time and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Darron and Natasha. I want to give space to leave any last minute comments that you all have, and also where can we find you? So we will start over with Natasha and then we'll go to Darron.
You mean where you can find me, like in person?
And on social media
Oh, yeah,
or how they can connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn is a great space to connect with me. So search my name at Natasha Young, and you'll find me on LinkedIn. I do keep my socials usually kind of private, but maybe if we know each other in some other capacity, find me on Instagram. It's my first and last name 16. So yeah, thanks so much, y'all, for engaging.
Yeah, so very similar to Natasha, you can find me on all the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. It's all Darron Jenkins. If you search it, you'll see my wonderful face will pop up. So I'd love to connect with anyone that wants to connect. And Lee, thank you so much for having us. I appreciate it.
And I know that Dr. G had to slide out, but I just want to say one last huge thank you. Whether you're joining us live, whether you're joining us in 2029 or 2157, and you're watching this back from the digital age, by then it'll be downloaded in your brain, right? We are just so grateful that you all have been a part of this conversation, not only to think about development, but also inclusive leadership. So, as I said, we have 2 events coming up. Take some time. Feel free to screenshot these. And we can't wait to see you all again next week. That's all for us for Manifesting Inclusion. And if you would like to connect with us, learn more, write some blogs, just being engaged in what we do, please connect with us at Manifesting Inclusion or send us a message at Manifesting Inclusion